Good evening and welcome to another episode of Education Matters with Jim O'Connell. You're very welcome. Thank you for joining me. I was to have, and will have in a minute, I was to have a guest on here tonight, school board member and candidate for school board, Dan Bergeron. And sadly, at the time we set this up, we were unaware that there would be a subcommittee meeting on at City Hall down the street starting at 6:15. So he has promised to join me. So if you see somebody scurry by the camera at some point, Dan will join us. Will join us a little later in the show, and then have to depart again because we have there is a school board meeting tonight at 7:00. At City Hall. If you're watching this live, please feel free to call in. The call-in number is 640-3091. That's area code 603-640-3091. And we're here on Tuesday, October 10th at 6 p.m. So a couple of things. I'd like to start by congratulating a principal in Manchester, Principal Brennan, Christine Brennan, who from Beach Street School, and she was just chosen as the Assistant or Deputy Commissioner of Education for the state of New Hampshire. So kudos to her and congratulations, and it'll be good to have another Manchester voice, or a Manchester voice up in Concord, because Manchester really needs those voices. I have to say that I was listening to somebody speaking this morning or the other morning on The Exchange, which is a program run by Laura Canoy on New Hampshire Public Radio, and they were discussing the economic future of the state of New Hampshire and the people involved were business development, people involved in business development for the state, etc. And I'm sorry, I just didn't catch the name because he spoke about something that rang very true to me. And he was talking. This gentleman lives on the seacoast, and he was pointing out that it wasn't that it was very important to the state of New Hampshire that the city of Manchester should thrive and do well. Because it's only if its biggest city was doing well, it's only in that circumstance that the southern New Hampshire generally and all of New Hampshire eventually would be economically vibrant as well. So it's a simple thought, but a profound thought. That those who, and I've talked before about the imaginary lines that exist sort of somewhere on DW Highway, between, as you leave Manchester to the north, that somehow there's a magic line you cross over and you're in Hooksett. Or when you go to Massabesic Rotary, that there's a magic line there and you cross into Auburn. Or a magic line on the Bedford side on Boynton Street, or the various other boundaries that we have, the airport with Londonderry, etc. That those are artificial lines drawn on a map. And while they have administrative and political and legal ramifications, from a society point of view and from the idea of our economic well-being point of view, those lines are at best blurred, and I would argue not of any consequence. So when it comes to economic development or crime or all the socioeconomic impacts of an area, those lines don't matter. So people in Hooksett or Auburn or Candia or Londonderry, Bedford, etc., who think that having Manchester underserved is somehow not going to affect them in their pockets, are ill-informed. And taxpayers in those towns ought to know that as Manchester goes, so will their town go as well. So the argument here is a statewide one, that at the state of New Hampshire, it's important that Manchester have a bigger voice, a louder voice, and I'm fine with where somebody may come from, but I think that anybody representing Hooksett or Candia or Auburn or Bedford should, of course, owe allegiance to the people who voted for them, but they should have an eye to what's going on in Manchester. when it comes to education, we know that Manchester is the least well-funded school system in the state of New Hampshire on a per capita basis, and we also know it's the highest. It's got the highest pupil-teacher ratio of any school district in the state. We also know that the better-off towns in the state of New Hampshire spend more on their kids than the less well-off towns do. Manchester, in one sense, is doing a wonderful job funding all the things that it's funding, given its economic profile. I'm not one of those who believes that Manchester. I heard somebody call it earlier on today a poor city. I don't believe that for a minute. You only have to drive around and look at the car dealerships and the wonderful restaurants and in the city. It's not made up of just, dollar sandwiches and Taco Bells, with all due respects to Taco Bell. But there's Manchester is a vibrant and dynamic city, and could be an awful lot more so with the right political leadership. But I think it's important that this idea that people more generally in southern New Hampshire ought to be fighting for Manchester to be as positive as it can be, and to get the funding that it needs. Because in the end, we look at the opiate crisis, and people end up coming to Manchester. They're attracted to Manchester because of the services available. I wish there were more services available, but even insofar as the ones we have, they come here for it. We see people who live in Hooksett or Auburn, they come to Manchester, they wine and they dine in Manchester, they work in Manchester, they visit Manchester. So they have a real interest in what's going on in Manchester. So I think that's an important thought that we should support. They ought to support. The idea that Manchester ought to get the funding that it requires, because in the end, it's ultimately unfair for somebody who argues constantly, and I will continue to do so, argue that the Manchester taxpayers get the best bargain for $1 better than anybody else in the state. That's just simply true. I also recognize the fact that in order to supply all the services and to have this city run as well as it should run, then it becomes a regional issue and not just a city issue. And I make no apologies, and I'm not embarrassed to say that I expect taxpayers in surrounding towns to actually contribute, to make a net contribution to the city of Manchester. When you think about mutual help, etc., when something is wrong somewhere, it's Manchester goes running out over one of those imaginary lines to help, in whatever format it might be. So I think that's an important thought for people for people to have. I think it's important when it comes to the state and the state passing down costs back to the cities. It's not something that should be supported by our representatives. And I think this is an important thought when we have people running for statewide office, that they ought to be pushed on this topic. And when it comes to the mayoral race, which we're going to have now in under a month, right? The mayor's race, as well as the alderman and school board races, will be on November 7th. And first of all, please go out and vote. It's so important. About 10,000 people in Manchester went out and voted during the primary. There needs to be a much bigger number voting. If you care about the city's future, if you care about our schools, you need to go out and vote, because there are those people out and voting who would like to see us, who have no interest in supporting our schools and making them the best schools that they can be. So choose your candidates that way, and then come out and vote for them. Sitting at home in the kitchen, railing at the TV, the newspaper, or chatting to your neighbours over the fence is fine, but the real way to achieve improvement is to come out and vote. I'm hoping, and I haven't discussed this with Joyce Craig. I did discuss it with Mayor Gattis a long time ago, which is the issue of pushing our representatives in Concord to 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 stop passing costs down to the city of Manchester, and to fund our education in the state properly. And his answer to that was good luck with that. So he wasn't that interested in pushing that, because of course he'd be trying to convince his own members of his own caucus, of his own party, to stop doing the things that they're doing. So I'm hoping that first of all, I hope that Joyce Craig does get elected, I have to say, and but when she does, one of the things I would want her to do as part of her job would be to make sure that Manchester is properly represented in Concord. The mayors from other cities, the mayor of Portsmouth, the mayor of Nashua, are up in Concord on a regular basis, pushing for and representing their cities, and pushing for funding for projects that are of interest to them. And Manchester needs to be just as active in the same way. We are the economic engine that supplies many of the towns around us anyway. If Manchester disappeared tomorrow, then there'd be a big sucking sound where those towns around us are today. So it's in their interest and ours to make sure that this happens. So I'm hoping that amongst many things that I wish that Joyce Craig will do, I hope she will spend considerable amounts of time, if not herself there personally, I'd hope she'd do that too, but that she would know that what goes on in Concord is going to have a major impact on what's happening in the city. And we see this when it comes to building aid. Building aid has been blocked for 10 years in the state of New Hampshire. There hasn't been building aid. In any other state, if you were investing in your schools and your buildings, then you get matching aid, or much, much greater than perhaps matching aid from the state and also from the federal governments. So, that doesn't matter as much to a town like, Crawford Notch, or a town like Sunapee, where there's one elementary school, and when it needs a new roof, it's going to be once every 20 years. In a city like Manchester, when you have no building aid for 10 years, we have 22 schools. Some of them are multiple buildings. They're all sitting there, and they have requirements, and they need improvement, they need maintenance, and they need upkeep. And so, the state of New Hampshire just wringing its hands on the topic is not good enough. Let me, jumping on here for a second, on the school board site, mansd.org. I advise people all the time to go on it. There's always lots of information on there. There's the coffee and conversation thing that Dr. Vargas, our superintendent, has been doing. Is a wonderful opportunity for people to go and speak to the superintendent. And I have to say, I talked to somebody who was at one recently, and there were some teachers there, etc., but there were only two parents there, or two members of the public. So I guess that's fine. If you don't have any questions about education in the city, and you don't need to represent anything to anybody, then that's great. You don't need to be there. I find it amazing that you go on Facebook and people have all kinds of complaints to make and comments to make, not always, but sometimes ill-informed, or sometimes just downright wrong. And I see people, push back sometimes when somebody goes on Facebook and says, my son was at whatever school and something happened and nobody did anything about it and it's terrible and why are they doing this? Or the lunch period was cut short by 15 minutes and I'm outraged and why did they do that? And people say, did you ask the principal? Did you ask anybody? And then you ask them, well, how do you know it even happened? Well, my 7-year-old son told me, and he wouldn't lie. Well, I don't know. He may not lie. It's nice to think that kids don't, but kids are certainly misinformed. Kids certainly get the wrong end of the stick. Kids certainly often only hear half what you tell them. When a teacher stands up and might say, because such and such a thing is happening today, we're reducing the lunch period by 10 minutes. Little Johnny often doesn't hear that. And he just comes home to mom and says something, and then mom goes on Facebook and she's like, typing reams about the school district and what they and should and shouldn't do. And yet when Dr. Vargas goes out into the community every couple of weeks and is sitting there waiting to answer any questions people might have, People are too busy. I guess Facebook hours are more accommodating of people's schedules than the hours he's offering. But in any case, the next ones come up. The first one is tomorrow morning at 7:30 a.m. is at Parker Varney Elementary School over on Pollock Drive. And then the following day at October 12th at 4:30 p.m. After school at Southside Middle School. He'll be there from 4:30 p.m. So that's Dr. Vargas at Parker Varney Elementary School at 7:30 tomorrow morning, and then on October 12th at 4:30 in the afternoon he'll be there. And in those, the format for those is very simple. He comes, he usually says a few words, and then offers people to ask any questions they might like to ask. I'm delighted that I hear the pitter-patter of tiny feet, or maybe they're very large feet. I haven't looked down to see, but our school board representative from Ward 6, Mr. Dan Bergeron, has joined us. If you want to move a little bit this way towards the microphone, if you want to move that, I think she'll get you. And you're going to be looking at this camera over here, Dan. Okay. Okay. And sometimes there'll be a joint shot on, but that's where we are. Welcome. Nice of you to fit us in. I know I was explaining to people that we had that you would be on, but that you had a subcommittee meeting prior to this, and I know you're dashing away before 7 to be at the school board meeting for 7 o'clock. So I'm very pleased that you could that you were able to fit us in. So
I'm glad the time and makeup was really quick.
Really? They did a wonderful job.
Yeah, they did.
They did.
Thank you.
So Dan, we know each other and have done for some time. So, but why don't you take a minute to just speak to the people of Manchester, whoever's watching, and of course, ladies and gentlemen, we have the call-in number 640-3091 if you have any questions for me or for school board member Bergeron. So go ahead, Dan, and you can let people know whatever you'd like them to know.
Wow, Polycom, very nice.
Two of them.
I used to work in technology, so I guess you always do once you're done, when you catch the bug. But I'm Dan Bergeron. I finished the term of State Senator Donna Soucy. I finished her term in 2013. I finished the term of my former opponent in 2015, and then this is currently the term I was actually elected to for a full term. So it's kind of interesting just being thrown on the school board. It's many of us this time wanted a little more training, just because it's like, it seems like a lot of people kind of follow, the school board, or, in my case, I always say to folks, I was, training for this job for so many years and didn't know it. Yeah, and it's just being active in school and sort of being one of those parents that's either volunteering or asking questions, and advocacy. And advocacy is not always necessarily fun and games. Advocacy definitely involves the tough questions. So as I said, and growing up in a large family, I was sort of blessed with that conflict resolution kind of skills. So I feel like that all kind of prepared me for, role on a school board, because it's true. If you're going to advocate for somebody, you have to be prepared on all fronts.
Dan, I have to say that, I've been at this education topic in Manchester now for quite some years, and I still I learn new things every day. Maybe not every day, but often. And
I learned something new from you on your call today.
Earlier on today, yeah. So the first, but the big picture stuff is that it's quite complex. In the end, it is a $167 million enterprise with 13 or 14,000 students, a couple of thousand staff, 22 buildings. And being on the board of that sort of corporation, if it were a corporation, there's a lot of moving parts. So it's not as simple as it always sounds. And I think the first thing that people who are not steeped in it or haven't spent a lot of time, I think, obviously everybody's opinions steeped in it. Yeah, everybody's opinion's valid, but sometimes I think if your first reaction to something that's happening in the school district is, why are they, implied those fools, doing that? I would take out those fools out of the implication out of that, and say, why are they doing that? Because often, not always, of course, because sometimes you'll be the very smart one in the room, you being that person. One is. But oftentimes there is a legitimate reason why things happen in a certain way, and it's very easy on the outside sort of looking in, and that's why I'm more careful as being on the outside looking in, not to cast stones and before inquiring first. And just before you walked in, I was just talking to people about Dr. Vargas's meeting tomorrow morning, and again,
Coffee and Conversation.
Coffee and Conversation. And I was lamenting the fact that more people didn't go. But I was just saying to people, if you're really interested, you want some answers, there's a face-to-face.
Absolutely. I always say that about subcommittee meetings. Like, I just came from athletics, and not one person spoke. And whenever I have parents or students walking up to me with various concerns, like whether it's volleyball or as we talked about middle school soccer, I mean, you wouldn't know people feel passionate. There's not
Right.
anybody there really. They rarely speak at that meeting, and when they do, I mean, they get the attention, and they get so
Yeah.
much attention, especially students. My God, we're like
Yeah.
we're practically like hanging on every word of a student when they when they show up. So I always say it's such a great audience, folks. Take advantage of it. Go to subcommittee meetings. It's amazing.
Yeah, people do want to hear, and I have I've had kids, and I've said to my kids, one time I've had 2 of my 4 kids come before. I don't know if it was the Boromir and Alderman or the school board, but they came before
Yes.
one. I think it might have been school board.
I was there with for the last 2.
So 2, they came in one time, and that was the only time they did. And you'd imagine, sort of being up my loin, so to speak. You'd imagine they
Right.
would have, but they haven't got
Dad,
that.
I don't want to do that again.
Again,
Leave me alone. Yeah.
So what is your? Let me ask you about Dr. Vargas. So his 1-year anniversary is up, and how do you feel about him? How is working with him been, and how do you think it's going?
Well, I guess the way I'm going to answer that question is, first of all, I kind of like some of the different strategies, and I'm kind of that mind that tries to look at things from all angles, and I guess I can sort of give you sort of a couple of examples. When it comes to doing school board, I thought about it when I first started here, because when you're first thrown in, I had to sit there and think, okay, I'm going to go back to all my education. What has all these, these thousands of dollars told me and taught me in these situations? And it just said, your mission, your vision. It's like, why are you doing this? What's important to you? But not only that, I'm here I have a target market, I have, constituents, and, I was fortunate to have a couple of kids that had a lot of friends, and they were kind enough to share their thoughts, because not all students do, because not all adults sort of have that. I always say some adults suck. They
Right,
do. It's
right.
as simple as that, and kids know it. They size up that respect factor in about 2 seconds. I always pray that whenever my kids would meet a new teacher, I'd be going, let's hope this works out. I'd be
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
hopefully they know that boys learn differently.
Well,
Things like
yeah,
that.
I think
so
that-
I stick to my mission and
Yeah,
vision.
yeah.
So that's what I stuck to, and that's to this day what I stick to. That's why I have this sort of informal student advisory board and educators, because if you think about it, this is like a beast, like you were saying. And who am I to think I know everything? I don't. And,
Right.
and if it wasn't for students, like right now I'm canvassing and I'm actually seeing a lot of students, but if it wasn't for them, I mean,
Right.
I feel like I wouldn't have any knowledge walking in there. So if I feel like I really sort of have, them in mind, or their thoughts, or what they're, pretty much what's on their mind simply, then I feel like I can just kind of go in there. And I always say I go in there when the politics, and I go, la, 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 and I just go in there sort of just, armed with that.
Yeah.
And, to this day, that kind of helps me. So that's kind of like how I, view, everything when it comes to the superintendent. And I know that, he sort of practices to the mission and vision. He's a little on the edge, and I think people have realized that about him, just to do things differently. And we keep him to task on questions that we have, and he the same. So, I kind of like that he challenges us a little bit on the board.
Right.
Because I've, since day one, my first vote on the board was Dr. Livingston's vote as a superintendent, or a new superintendent, which resulted in her, and so ever since that, I remember in the first week, speaking to her about professional development, how, just coming from where I had worked for so long, it's such a common thing everywhere else that you work, whether it's, webinars, and every year you sign ethical agreements, and you look at, all these different recordings about, harassment at the workplace, and I was sort of a little lost as to why that sort of structure didn't exist in something like this that's so important.
Right.
That kind of like, where that arena, that something can enter so quickly in those things here. So, so from that perspective, so it just seems like those things were also important to Dr. Livingston, and that it's easy for a superintendent to get caught up in the,
Yeah.
in Manchester, I guess
Yeah,
is what
yeah,
you're saying.
yeah.
So it's like, he'll be a good person that I can keep on task and kind of circle back to that thing. And I'm starting to see some of those things happen, which is good.
Good. One of the when you don't have, because things are as constrained as they are, and because we don't have BLILs anymore, and we don't have, curriculum leaders, and we don't have all that stuff.
We
So,
have some BLILs.
pardon?
We're BLIL full.
So one of the things that you
High
have
school.
these silos that exist in the schools, for good or for ill, but there's very little time in the year where the teachers at one school can compare notes with, or learn from
Good
each
point.
other, lessons learned, etc. across. In the end, we have 14, I think, elementary schools. We've 4. We're lucky that our 4. I'm always singing the praises of our 4 middle school principals, because I like them a
yeah.
lot, because they're very different people. They
Yes.
all have different values, different understandings, different approaches. But I love the way they work together and
yeah.
complement each other.
Well, we're seeing 4 community schools
Right.
happen before our eyes.
But
It's
there's
pretty
no,
exciting.
there's
Thank
no,
you.
there's no lesson. There's no real silos there. At least they've broken down those silos.
Yes,
To some.
good point.
One of the thoughts, observations perhaps that I've had is that the lack of vertical integration. So that may be
Mm-hmm.
helped by the new design. But what I mean by that is, a kid goes into Green Acres. Well, Green Acres might be an exception because it's on the same campus as McLaughlin. But in any other school, a kid goes into McDonough. And, the handoff between 5th grade in McDonough and 6th grade at the middle school is immediate and sharp. And, maybe
Yes.
a kid who's got a really particular set of problems or something gets handled very well. But they just get dropped by by a school they've had for 5 years, and they're just picked up by the new people. And
Right.
it'd be nice to see a better transition there. What's your thought on that?
Just you got a couple hours for that word
Yeah,
transition.
right,
That's all you have to
right,
say with me.
right.
I'm always concerned about transitions. That's why I'm always telling parents. Every time I'm out there canvassing, when they have a student moving on, I'm like, did you get him in the music department? Did you get him in the music department? Hey,
Right.
did you? So only because that makes that transition so much easier, because you almost have sort of a pseudo instant family right there.
Right.
Especially going into high school with band camp.
Yes,
That's
yes.
always a good thing. But just in the music department in general, my son came home from the first day as a freshman from high school, and what he said from being in the music department, he said, "It's nice. It was nice not to have 100 people tell me to go down the wrong hallway." So that was his
Yeah.
way of saying it was nice to have someone have my back.
Yeah,
It was just,
yeah,
it was kind of neat in that sense. So transitions, I see where, and I know the feeder pattern will help to that, because
Right.
there can be more sort of more programs built on that. And I've already discussed that with principals, and I've discussed that, with people when they were concerned or not even concerned or thrilled about feeder patterns, because we can't always be talking about issues. Sometimes when invitations are sent out to attend events or public forums, it's always, people can come and, and discuss the issues. And I'm always like, well, you can also discuss, the more positive things that are going
Right.
around too, because
Right.
issues seems to be a little sexier for some reason,
Right.
It seems to make the papers more. But, there's so many great things going on in the district. And you and I learned something from our exchange that, it's like you can't, talking about the good things doesn't necessarily cover up the realism of what's going on in spending per pupil and whatnot, athletics, and how I feel like it should be full-time versus part-time. Because
That's the director, right?
yeah, the
part-time
director of, and because I just feel like that could put us on the map somehow. And of course, we all have our feelings, and we all have our thoughts, and we express them, But when it comes to those transitions, it's I'm gonna be with you right now and say that I think those programs are, I think we have to keep on them, but I really feel like that they can work out, and I think it can be student to student too, almost like a big brother or big sister, like you see in some. I remember my wife was in nursing school and she had a big
Right.
sister. It's
Right,
very
right.
it's very typical of that, but. I will ask you, I don't know what your opinions are on this, but the high school, the middle school to high school transition too, they're both frightful if you think about
Right,
it.
right.
And I just hope adults just remember how frightful that was, like I do.
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
never forget that transition to high school, and
Well,
and from that, so it's
one
like
of the things is, so it depends on the kid, right? So the kids who are self-driven and I mean, God bless them. Some kids are actually organized by the time they get to be 14. I don't know how small a minority it is, but I got to tell you, I don't think I was when I see,
they know what they want to do in when they grow up.
Yeah,
You know, they
like, well, the ones who are ready, like who sort of self-advocate, they go into freshman year in high school and they're already ready to say, oh, I think I'm in the wrong class. Oh, I really would prefer to do this. But that's a very small minority.
Or they know to take math as a freshman because they have sort of their goals, as far as,
So we're, but the kids who don't, and the majority of kids aren't going to be, I know, I have a 15-year-old who's a sophomore, so, I know I have some idea about what how a 14-year-old is, but as they approach high school, they need I worry about the kids who don't have advocates for them. Like, I'm aware of a situation that happened in middle school recently, where parents spent the first month of school. This issue was resolved last week, and I don't want to belabor us here with it because it's just one point and it doesn't illustrate anything other than parents advocating for a kid. So a kid who wasn't and this was not an IEP or special ed issue, this was just academics, and a kid wasn't in the right class that they should be in, and they ended up pushing it all the way up through with great difficulty, right through until they got to the superintendent, and eventually had the matter resolved last week. The superintendent resolved the issue in their favor. But they were told at all levels up until then, we can't do that, we can't do that, we can't do that. I have great sympathy for the teachers and administrators who were saying we can't do that because they don't have the, and as an example, this, when you have a middle school and you've got 30 kids in your algebra class, what do you do with kids 31, 32, and 33? I know when I see 30 kids in an algebra class that there's a 31, 32, and 33 sitting in the wrong class somewhere. And 1 year in 10, the magic number might have dropped in right at 30. I'm sure there are years, I know of one school last year where sort of the word, so to speak, is that 12 kids who could have been in algebra didn't make it because there wasn't a classroom. Now, in another city, that's 30 plus the 12 who didn't make it, who should have. That's 42. So that really should have been 2 classes of algebra with 21 in the class. But everybody's hands are tied all the way up and down. But that's
just think of the attention we pay to AP, and we know that limiting that number sort of needs that same
well,
mentality.
at least we're expanding that. I think that's a good thing.
Absolutely.
Because on the other end of that too, Dan, we don't have gifted and talented programs. So there are places where there's so many places where we could do some more. So I think it's important, and I think people should know, and I've said it, people who watch this show know about the additional $2 million last year and where the money went to, and that we added teachers into the middle schools and we added teachers into
I just
the
looked at the
schools.
elementary school enrollment numbers today, and I have to say it's a good thing we added teachers. There's still a couple of classrooms, of course, because I know elementary school is a little volatile.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just saying that the numbers fluctuates a lot because there seems to be some moving around, and people always come in at the last minute. But I saw a couple of numbers of concern, but I can tell you clearly it's not it's not what it has been, or of course, still an area of concern. I'm not going to say, just because it's a 2 or 3, it doesn't mean we're fine. No, that's not what I'm saying at all.
Yeah. But it's nice. The fact is that those 70 or whatever it was we put into elementary schools, it does have an effect. The fact that we needed 28 or whatever is neither here nor there. We have to be grateful for the piece we have. You mentioned the music program, right? So, how do you feel about sort of music, the arts generally? I mean, what's your vision about how they might look in the future in Manchester? I know it's something close to your heart. So, as far as the bands we have now, but what other things we might have, or how we might improve what we have, or what's the state of play as you see it?
That's a good question. And fortunately, we've always had advocates at the district level, because as you know, when Chris Martin first got into assistant superintendent position, she was the director of fine arts, and then that position got let go. So it was always nice. And then when I feel like I get on the board, I feel like there were 2 of us kind of watching out for for fine arts. Yes, and because both my kids were in music and ended up running that the pops at Memorial High School. And there's one thing I sort of did notice even in the middle school. When you're at McLaughlin, for example, it's a well-run parent support group that probably either has close to 100 volunteers. But that's not the case in other middle schools.
Right.
In other middle schools, sometimes you can't even boast 10. So that's the reason why we started actually even going to the elementary level, to try to just sort of like feed that funnel of volunteers, just going from elementary to middle to high. So it's like anything else. So the volunteers and parent interaction is just so key in a lot of those things. But I see Dr. Vargas as a big fan. He sees that as as a bright spot for the district. And I know, and you probably know too, I feel like the music department just saves kids, especially during transition. It just, and there is somewhat of an overachieving culture to it, but it doesn't mean you have to be that way to be in that culture. It just means, if that's your propensity, if that's what you like, then it's there for you.
Right. And we have to meet kids where they're at, right? So I'm a great,
yes. I see a bright future for it. Just to sort of answer your question, but I'm also, and I just want to get this in before I go, because it's just, it's just something that, community partnerships to me are just the key to our district. It's like, you talk about silo and every time I go out there, and this happened when I was, running the parent group at Memorial, you do an ad book. It's like, you walk into a concert or something and they give you the book and it has all that. Well, I remember Jimmy LaHoo was willing to do a fundraiser. He did that for some of the high schools because he's alumni. I believe it's West. And so he did one for Memorial. And so I decided I wanted to do an ad book for that. And also my son was in a band with some other students, so they got to open for them, which was nice. But out there, it's like, I was talking to so many businesses that are alumni, and they are just so proud to represent this district, and I'm like, God, why didn't we find you like 3 years ago? We could have like put your ad in this book like forever. So I'm just noticing that it's like these people they're out there, and we just got to find them and start partnering with them. And colleges and universities, I'm always driving to UNH or UNH Manchester, or I'm going to St. A's for things. I mean, there's so many things. You just sign up, and you get like these amazing speakers, and you go to the Carsey Institute, and so those community partners, and all of a sudden you hear so many existing nonprofits, for example, and I'll use the Weed and Seed strategy. It's a monthly meeting at the police department.
Right.
It's a partnership between the health department and the police department. And so you have Officer Duquette, and then you have Kristen, and they together humanize police to middle schoolers. They are the ones who put together the bicycles for fourth graders last year.
Right.
So they put together the registration and the safety component of it. But behind that, there's like so many nonprofits, and I was just all of a sudden it was just daunting how many folks out there service our students that I was unaware of, quite frankly. Right. So it's like it's not like they're sitting around waiting for us to partner with them, but some people are.
Yeah,
because,
they are,
and they want to. They want to be part of this district. They really do, because why not? I mean, we're 15,000 students, but I just feel like I guess we
and we have formal relationships that people know little about, like the one with GE and Hooksett, right, for the aeronautical program.
That is truly amazing. I want to know the numbers on that one. Yeah. That's my question tonight.
Right, and then there's the there's a piece on the website about right now about BAE in Nashua, and then we see on today's newspaper the Carpenters Union purchased a building on Kennedy Road.
Yes,
and they're talking about training people there. So my counter to when I listen to your chairman, Ted Gatzis, talk about interrupting people at meetings, which is something you're very familiar with, interrupting people at meetings and saying things like, I stand here for the taxpayers. What he needs to understand, and I hate to put it so sort of forcefully, but what he needs to understand is that there are a whole pile of taxpayers, as in the businesses of Manchester, the people running those businesses, the owners of those businesses, the men who are chomping at the bit, look and do not want to see a downsizing and an elimination and a holding back.
And do you know who those people are? People like everybody talks about of course STEAM. The STEAM Ahead program was two alumni, Memorial, Nick at Memorial, and then you have Jeremy at West. Just recently, I'll give you an example of how things could be out there. My son came back from a college in Maine and came back, and we had to sort of just rearrange things and just come up with a different plan. So it sort of took us for a plan. But in the meantime, Nick Sogu had been mentoring him, just because he had taught him intro to engineering to high school students. He taught a class at UNH, a non-credited one. But, and that's how my son actually decided on engineering, because he was like music, engineering. So he just kind of decided to go to engineering and hopefully in his master's bridge the two. But, so recently he wanted to meet with Nick and just say, this is what's happened now. I need a plan B. And so Nick said, well, listen, quit your full-time job, start at New Hampshire Tech, do software engineering, because he interviewed him and found that he was interested in that. And he more or less said, I'll put you on as a paid intern as well, because he does that for a lot of students or interns, and especially if they're interested in that field. And, and he said, I would say it'll work out that you'll even have employment here when you're done.
Right.
So it not only makes it him easier because it's so hard to find employment or underemployment in Manchester. That's why it's so imperative that we partner with people to find out, exactly, like you have engineering, seats in engineering classes that sit empty, and yet we have thousands of 14,000, high-tech jobs that sit there,
Right.
and we have a school district. So, right. So K-12, so, are all these people talking to each other?
But
so,
I would risk like not representing Nick Sogo, but I would my point about the taxpayers is the taxpayers are not just the group who have access to City Hall, and we know who they are. Right, because some of us don't have access to City Hall, despite what the mayor would say about his doors always open. His doors only always open to some people, and he certainly listens to some people, and we know that because we can. But there are people to be listened to. I look at someone like the
non-active Knicks. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Well, yeah, the Knicks and the the Knicks themselves.
Or like my son,
it's
taxpayer.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful that we can have these partnerships, and I'm all for it. And we need to do more of it. You're absolutely right. But my point is that as taxpayers, if those people were fully made aware that there were kids in our middle schools who were qualified and intellectually and academically capable of doing algebra in 8th grade, but we won't give it to them. We shut them off right there. We cut them off at the knees. So we want to have conversations in City Hall about cooperating with companies to put 4 people into it someplace, and someone's going to. But if you ask all the taxpayers fully, do you think that every kid in Manchester who's capable of doing advanced math in 8th grade should be given the opportunity, or do you think he should be told no because we won't pay for the teachers for him? I'm telling anybody who listens.
I think you know the answer to that question.
Of course, I know.
Because it may attract others who didn't think they were interested.
Right. So clearly, though, it seems to me that so it's like we put this poacher stamp in place, so we're able to say, look at one of the things we're doing, and we are. But when you have kids, when you have kids, my kids last year at Central High School, one a junior and one a freshman. Their 2 classes in math, advanced math, was 32 and 30. Right, that's I could be the most unfortunate family in Manchester, and only my 2 kids were sitting in classes that size. So, STEM is where it's at. I love the STEAM program. I love all these. It's great. We have some wonderful cooperation going on with Manchester. UNH Manchester has done some STEM work. They've
been knocking on our door for a long time.
While doing that, we also can't be stripping away the fundamentals from kids. I as an example, I don't usually go to eyes on this show.
I was going to say.
I have done this year, but
I should be interviewing you today. My God.
There you go. Well, no, but I'm just saying, it's like.
Let me interview you. So tell me how you feel about that.
Everybody knows.
I know how you feel about that.
But it's
That's
like
good, but
it's like we just need to. I love the idea. I think it's important, and I wish I could do it more. Talking about all the good things that happen in our school, because I want to do that. And I'm on this note.
It's just giving credit to our students is really what it's doing.
Yes, it
and
is.
Educators,
and also, I think we should. I think legitimately, credit can be taken for the steps taken this year in this budget. That $2 million is a big deal. It's when I boil it all down. While I'm not happy that we eliminated teachers this year, I'm glad that we took $2 million and put it into places we said we were going to put it. I'm hoping that's the first step of. And I've said this to Dr. Vargas, and I've said it to you and many others, that's the first step in a whole series of steps, because that's what our city needs to understand, that we did this, there is so much more we could do. So what do you think? What do you think the big topics are? Anything in particular coming up over the next few months? Is there what's boiling to the top, to the front? Is there any what for instance do you know, or is there anything you can share about? With regard to, we're missing, without going into the details of it, we're missing people in the administration because we haven't replaced Dave Ryan, we have special ed people. Is that something we expect to happen? I don't mean the individual jobs, but are those things in the hopper? Are they moving forward? Because it seems like there's been a silence on them.
Well, I not to necessarily discuss specifics or whatnot.
Yeah, we don't want to do that.
It's not that I'm scared to, but I ask the same set of questions that I do every time. I always ask about work culture and what's the environment like, and you have to ask that of anybody. Anybody in any management. You have to. Unfortunately, you have to ask the tough questions.
Yes,
and you know that more than anybody. So, but by the same token, we just have to stay open-minded of some choices, because I'm of the mindset that we have these professionals at the district, and they are professionals, and we hire them for that purpose. Yet, we're in there micromanaging some of their decisions, and
Here, Dan.
and
Here.
and I always say, I'm not an HR professional.
Right.
I'm not, necessarily. I'm not. Yes, I have, your MBA in business, but that doesn't make me a business administrator.
Right, right.
But by the same token, it's like we have to trust these people, because there's such a culture of, I think people are a little nervous to try new things. And I don't like a culture. I want people to be able to feel like they can make a mistake or try something new,
Right.
but there doesn't currently seem to be that culture right now, and I'd like to get to that place. So I'm hoping decisions are made where it's those types of people that sort of lend themselves to that culture or build that culture, because it's a trickle down.
Yeah,
You know that.
yeah,
Well, however
yeah.
it's at the top is going to trickle
it's gonna
down.
be.
That
But when you-
mentality. So so it does concern me. I mean, especially because it's hard to find, certain professionals that we need for, we're always talking about, paraprofessionals, and of course I'm out there trying to, I think I may have devised a partnership that makes sense for everybody, but, it's one of those things where I won't know that until I get down into specifics. But, it's, once again, I'm looking at the community for their help, and I think,
Yeah.
but
I
that
like
always,
what you
that
said
always
about-
concerns me.
Yeah, I like what you said about the idea of micromanaging, because that's one of my criticisms. For
Oh,
want
yeah,
of a
we're at the
word.
governance level. We're supposed to
yeah.
be making sure everybody has what they need. And how
Right,
can we do
right.
that if we're spending all our time in the
Right,
weeds, as we say in the restaurant?
In the weeds. And, there are too many people on the school board who see their position as, some think they
Yeah.
know everything, some think they know more than everybody else, and some just,
Yeah.
they don't understand the nature of their job, I think. I mean, as electors, as taxpayers, I think people vote people into, from our fellow citizens
Right.
into these boards to represent us in these boards, and to make sure that there's proper oversight, and that management is held to a task, held to account. But the actual to me, I use the analogy with the CEO on the board. The
Yes.
board. You could be on the board of, United Airways, and you could be from the chemical industry. You're not there to call in
Correct.
the pilots and say, why did you take a left at Logan, and why didn't you go
Right.
around over the ocean?
I've been doing a lot of, canvassing and campaigning with the aldermanic candidate, because I think that's important. Like my lawn signs have a third grader, I said, draw a picture of a city hall, a school, and a home, because the three have to work together. Otherwise,
Right.
it's not, otherwise it's not effective. And, so when he and I are at the door and we're talking to someone at a home, that's the three people that are needed really to really, make good decisions, have good feedback, that sort of thing. But, we do hear from a lot of people that discuss this exact thing, It's, and Pete, and he's
That's Peter
always
Peter
McCone. Yes,
McCone,
yes.
right,
As a matter of
yeah,
fact,
yeah.
I just got this. Stop by and get a quick coffee from him, since he,
Okay, yeah.
partners with 2 restaurants downtown. But it's one of those things where he always says, "Yeah, you got to surround yourself with with smarter people than you,
Right.
that type of thing." So it's just a question of it's like you have to, sometimes you have to know when to step back, because it's really not about you,
Right.
and that's really one of the biggest things I think I get out of this. I mean, it kind of happening with parenting a little bit. All of a sudden you realize it's like, I have to pay all this attention to someone else.
Yes,
And,
yeah.
it's like that on the school board and anything like that too. You really have to you have to step back and say, it's about them.
Right.
I mean, of course we have our our area of expertise
Right,
or whatnot,
right.
and put it all together. But by the same token, it's like that's crucial.
Well, let me say this to you. We're down to about 9 minutes.
This is fun. I want to do this
you're
again.
wel-
I always
Yeah,
enjoyed radio
You're
shows.
welcome. So
Oh, you're
we'll
so
have to have you
you're so
back.
good for this district. It's
No,
like,
I don't know about that. Don't-
oh, come on!
my
I'm
head
serious,
has
and
to fit out the door.
I think a lot of other people that, and the ones that don't feel that, well, that's because you're doing the right thing.
Yeah,
and that's what I have to tell myself too. When
Yeah,
when,
I
when
just-
people are being less than kind to me on the board,
Yeah,
a few
yeah.
people, and it's like, you must be doing something right. I don't know.
I think there's a lot of truth in that. Well, then, do you any final words you have for the people? I'm sure you'll come out and vote on November 7th, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because when it comes down to the numbers, and I did speak to a lot of people that didn't necessarily go out to the primary, but they plan on going out, on November 7th. But this is a sort of a big decision for for our city. I've noticed that a lot of people are actually more talkative at the door. In other words, they really have a lot to say now. I
Right,
think they feel
right.
like perhaps they maybe should have been talking at some other, last election, but I find a lot more people engaged this time. I don't know if that will turn into numbers. I'm talking to a lot of younger folks that are.
Right.
I mean, I've always talked to them anyway about how they feel about politics all the way to middle school. Middle school students actually they always have some component of running my campaign.
right.
But at this point, I would have to say, I tend to keep it clean. I just, especially, if there's sitting board members that are also running and, let's just say I don't agree with them. I've sort of always been raised where, sort of we're a family and I'm not going to go out there and say negative things about my brothers and sisters in a
right.
sense. And I just feel as a board, we should probably be a little more respectful in that area.
I wish that was. I
So-
hope that's the case as the new members, or if there are any new members come
Right.
in. But Dan, I appreciate
Yeah.
you coming by tonight.
So I
you
would-
always
yeah.
have a space here. If you, whenever you would wish, give me a shout.
Yes.
I'm sure the people appreciate hearing
Yes,
from you.
Dan Bergeron for school board Facebook page, and a lot of people, our community, even educators are sort of like, a lot of people are asking questions where, I find this year's a little different, and I like that,
Good.
So,
Good. Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for coming.
thank you
in.
all, and thank you.
All right,
Seriously.
you're welcome. Thank
All
you,
right.
Dan. All the best. Let me shake your hand
Okay,
as you
yes,
depart.
and
Thank
you're
you.
going to keep
Good luck.
talking as I walk away, right?
I'm going to be
Okay.
chatting away as we.
Thank
as
you
we
all.
polish
Thanks
up
for
things
watching.
over 10 minutes. So, ladies and gentlemen, there we have school board member Dan Bergeron from Ward 6. He's leaving us because he has his real job to go back to, which is back as a school board member. There's a school board meeting on tonight, starting at 7:00, which is in about 10 minutes from now, or a little less.
I'll be moving it then.
All right, bye, Dan. So, once again, over the coming weeks, we'll have, I think next week, if I remember correctly, I think we have Kathy Staub and I believe Leslie Want. I think they're here next week, and then we have people in over the weeks between now and November 7th. So, Dan's a good guy. He certainly has an ear for the kids, and he's very kid centric, and that he's always been that. So I like that about him. I just wanted to when you there are those who. They're what I call the parental notification and parental rights people, and I'm all sound with that. I'm great with that. It obviously makes sense. Parents are in the end they're the first and most influential person in their kids' lives, and they should be the kid's strongest advocate. And those who lead with parental notification and the parents need this, my observation is that often what they really mean is that a small group of parents who've got strong opinions on issues like whatever it might be, the ones who think that the federal government is, putting wires on their kids' heads and extracting ideas or planting ideas in their kind of people. It always it seems to come from them, because when you actually talk about real, reaching out to parents, it's illustrated by the fact that Dr. Vargas has these meetings on both in the morning early and in the afternoon, and most parents are, I think, satisfied that they know their teachers in the school. Their teachers are not some strange group of people. The teachers and administrators are friends, their neighbours, their sons and daughters, their aunts and uncles and in-laws. And in the end, Manchester's a city, but it's not that big a city. And people do know their teachers, and I think finally they trust them. We've got an incoming call. Let me just grab this. Go ahead, caller. Who's this?
Hi, Jim. It's your buddy Phil.
Hi, Phil. How are you? I'm great, thanks. What's going on?
I'd love to hear you answering the phones right away. You don't even have somebody helping you out. It's a lean budget.
We're a lean, mean machine. So what's...
Love it. I'm a few minutes behind, but I if you don't mind,
Yeah.
can I chime in just to
Please, yeah, we've got
Couple
about on the live side. We got about 5 minutes left. So go ahead.
all right. Micromanaging.
Yeah,
Generally speaking, a bad idea, and that's where I caught you guys with
yeah,
committee member Bergeron.
right.
But
Agreed.
let me say this. Monday morning quarterbacking is always easy, right? Looking out the rearview mirror.
Right.
God bless the school board members that questioned the prior administration. And I'll say it, Deborah Livingston.
Right.
disaster at every turn. And I know you only have a few minutes, but if you want to get into the weeds, I could run down a whole list.
Of disasters on the yeah.
And to the flip side, now we have Dr. Vargas. Let's give him a chance. Let's back up, and let's let him run the district.
Right.
Because by all metrics, he's on his way. His track record, what he's done so far, whether it's redistricting, reaching out to the community, involving businesses, connecting with people. So, and I know that the board's divided, and you know where my allegiance lies.
Right.
I don't have to go down that road.
Right, right.
But for anybody that's, beating the drum about school board members that were micromanaging last year or the year before or 2 years ago or 3 years ago,
right.
God bless them. Because it was a mess, and they had the courage to do it.
Right.
And now they have the courage to let the superintendent lead.
Right.
And unfortunately, we can't get the rest of the group to say, you know what, even though we didn't pick them, and some of the people we have been at odds with and we don't agree with picked them, we're all going to get on board because it's about kids.
Right.
It's not about political parties or ideologies or we won it or we lost. So.
Can I ask you a question though? We're down to the last couple of minutes, so we really don't have much time. But just as a question, so do you feel, as I'm puzzled by this, do you feel that there are people on the current school board who are sort of working against Dr. Vargas? Do you think there's some issue there that we're not seeing in private or something?
I think you're seeing it, Jim. Maybe you're not speaking it, but I would love to go, and I will do it. There's 14 members. They all have a number.
Right.
Let's go one by one. Let's put all the cards on the table.
Yeah.
And let's lay it all out there. You know why?
Why? Because
there's 25 kids in the kindergarten class. There's this, there's that, and there's a lot of positive things going on.
Right. Right.
There have been some structural changes, redistricting.
Right.
Not perfect, but it's started.
It's a start. Yeah.
Middle schools, blah blah.
Yep.
It's unbelievable. I could throw out a few numbers, 259, and you know where I'm going with it. And I don't agree with all of them.
Right.
I agree with most of them. But if they brought up a cure for cancer, 10-4, 9-3.
Right.
And then you have other people that were actually in education.
Yeah.
Hey,
yeah.
When, and I'll say it. When is somebody going to say 25, 27 kids in a kindergarten is not right?
They need to, yeah, you're right. They need to say it.
Especially a former educator. Wait a minute. Especially a former educator.
Right.
Who I've had private conversations with.
Right.
Say, rather than have a parade to say we have full-day kindergarten, please, will you lead the bandwagon? Will you wave the flag and say, we need half-day kindergarten, even though it doesn't sound as good, but there's 12 kids in a class.
Right.
And by the way, they're 5 years old. So if you get 2.5, 3 good hours with them,
right, you've done fine anyway. Hey, I'm sorry we've reached the end of our hour, so we'll have to do this later, Phil. Thank you for calling in.
I caught you late.
No, it's good.
I appreciate all your work.
It's all good. It's all good. I appreciate you calling in, Phil.
I appreciate your children taking care of my lawn.
Okay. Thanks, Phil. I'll talk to you soon.
Man.
All right. Bye-bye. Bye. That is the one and only Phil Sapienza, a wonderful man who is a teacher at Hillside Middle School amongst other things. And I like Phil. He has a lot of common sense to offer, and he also has a historical view out over time. And I think he alludes to in that conversation part of the board before this one, when it was really Art Beaudry and Deb Livingston versus the rest, so to speak, and votes kept going 12-2, 12-2. Anyway, we've run out of time tonight. We're down to the last few seconds, so we'll see you again next week. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you all soon. Good night and goodbye from Jim O'Connell and Education Matters. See you. Bye-bye.